Hello guys, my name is Piros Katsos and today we're going to see how we can scan our project's assembly to apply only the configuration we want out of all that there exist in our project. Now a use case for that obviously would be to have more than one DbContext, and each of that DbContext would have their own configurations. Now let me go to my project, and I have in my models folder a customer model and a product model. I also have a customer read model and a product read model, and that's because I want to separate my reads from the writes. So for that purpose I also have in my persistent folder two DbContext, one for the writes, the write DbContext, and one for the reads, the read DbContext. Now I have already made a video on how to use different DbContext that targets the same database and the exact same tables. I will link it in the description, and actually that's the same project I used for this video. I only added the product model. Now I only have two configurations, but imagine if I had 3 or 4 or 5 or 6. Not only that can become very lengthy and ugly really fast, but I also need each time that I create a configuration to come to my DbContext and apply that manually. That's not very convenient. So first of all we need a way to differentiate between our configurations. So I'll go to my write configuration and I will add an interface, and I will call that write configuration, and that will be, let me fix that typo, write configuration, and make that an interface. I'm sorry, and I will make that a generic interface. So I write configuration of T, and I want everyone who's going to implement that I write configuration of T to also implement the entity type configuration of T, and we need here the constraint that T needs to be a reference type. Okay, so now let me go copy my write configuration, and I will go to customer configuration, and instead of the entity type configuration it will implement the write configuration of customer. Now if I go and remove that method, my ID will yell at me, and if I go and press Ctrl dot or Alt Enter or whatever your shortcut is, it will implement that configure method. So let's go and paste that back. Okay, and now let's copy that write configuration and have the product configuration implement the write configuration of product. And now I will go and do the same thing for my read configuration. So I will add an interface, I will call that read configuration. That will be also generic, and let's say the int. And now let's have our read configuration to implement the read configuration. So the customer read model configuration will implement the read configuration of customer read model, and the product read model configuration will implement the read configuration of product read model. Okay, now that we differentiate our configurations, let's go back, let's say, to my write DbContext, and in here we would need an extension method to that builder. Let's call that apply configuration also, and instead of the configuration itself we will want to pass the type of write configuration and also an assembly to scan. So assembly.get executing assembly. Now obviously that method does not exist, so we're going to create that. I will go to the root of my persistence folder, and I will add a new class, and I will call that model builder extensions. And that will be a static class because our apply configuration method will be an extension method. So public static void apply configurations options, and we'll accept the model builder. So this model builder, let's call that builder, also a type which will be our configuration type, and finally the assembly to scan. Now, what are we trying to achieve here? Let's say that we call this apply configuration method and the configuration type is the iWrite configuration. So imagine if we had a list with all our write configurations, so we could say that for each configuration in our list, let's call the apply configuration method of the builder and pass the configuration, and that's exactly what we are going to do here. So first of all, we need to get the interfaces with the implementation for each type, and then we need to call the configure method of our builder for each configuration. First of all, we will need a list that will hold all our configuration interfaces types. So we'll say var configuration interfaces equals with new list of type. And then we will need a dictionary that will hold the interface and the implementation. So we will call that dictionary, very imaginative I know, equals with new dictionary of type and type. So let's now go and get our interface and their implementations. First of all, let's take all the types of that assembly. So var types equals with assembly.getTypes. Now let's iterate through this type. So for each type and types, let's get the interface type. So var interface types equals with type.getInterfaces, and we only need those interfaces that are generic, so where x dot is generic type, and we also need that generic type to be the same as the configuration type that we have passed. So x.getGenericType definition equals with our configuration type. And now let's add that interface types to our configuration interfaces list. So configuration interfaces dot add range interface types. So if we had passed the iWrite configuration in our example, at that point in our configuration interfaces we would have an iWrite configuration of customer and one iWrite configuration of product. Now let's go and take their implementations. So for each type in configuration interfaces, let's add to our dictionary the interface type and the implementation. So dictionary.add a type, and for the implementation we need to take from all the types the one that is assignable to the interface type. So x dot is assignable to type. So at that point in our dictionary we would have an iWrite configuration of customer with the write configuration of customer, and the iWrite configuration of product with the product configuration. So let's go now and call the generic apply configuration method of our builder for each of our configurations. First of all, I will need a method info, and that will be the apply configuration. So from the builder I will get the type and then the method. So builder.getType.get method, and now I need to pass the name of the method. So name of builder.apply configuration, and the model builder class has only one apply configuration method, so we don't need to specify anything else. And now let's iterate through our dictionary. So for each var, let's call that key value pair in our dictionary. And first let's create an instance of our configuration. So var configurations equals with activator dot create instance, and let's pass the configuration, and that would be the key value pair dot value. Now let me say at this point that we will debug our application and we will see in detail everything that happens here. So let's continue now. Let's take that generic apply configuration. So we'll say var configuration method, and we need in the method info that we previously get, and we know that that's not null, to call the make generic method, and we need to pass the generic argument. So that would be in our interface. So in our key value pair dot key we will call the get generic arguments, and since we know that it only has one of those, we can say dot first. And now finally let's call that apply configuration method with our configuration. So configuration method dot invoke, and now we need to pass the instance that we want to call that method, so that will be our model builder. And now we need the parameters, so the invoke method takes a list of objects as a parameters, so we will say new, and we will pass the configuration. Okay, so now if we go back to our write DbContext, let me copy the name, apply configurations. I can say that, and that will compile, and let's do the same for our read DbContext, and let me remove those manual applied configurations. So we'll go to our read DbContext and we'll do the same, but instead of the iWrite configuration we'll pass the iRead configuration, and let's add the namespace for the assembly also. Okay, now let me really fast create a migration and update the database. Okay, now update my database, and I also fixed the name of my connection string, which I had made a mistake. And now if I go to my program.cs, I instantiate a write DbContext and a read DbContext. I use the write DbContext to create a customer and a product, and then my read DbContext to retrieve a customer read model and a product read model, and then I print the customer and the product so that we can see that everything works fine. And now let's go back to our to our model builder extension and put a breakpoint so we can see what will happen, and let's click debug. Okay, we hit our breakpoint, As you can see, the configuration type is the iWrite configuration, and in here in our configuration interfaces, as you can see, we already have our iWrite configuration of customer and our iWrite configuration of product. Now we'll also take the implementation, so let's hit continue, and now in our dictionary we have first an iWrite configuration of customer and the customer configuration, and then the iWrite configuration of product and the product configuration. Let's step over. Now our method info is the apply configuration method, and now let's iterate through our dictionary. So our first key value pair has as key the iWrite configuration of customer and the customer configuration, and now we will create an instance of that configuration. So as you can see, that configuration is a customer configuration, and now we will create that configuration method of customer, and as you can see, it's an apply configuration method that takes as a parameter an identity type configuration of customer. And now we will apply that migration, and our application will do the same for the product configuration and then the same for the DbContext. So let's hit continue, and let's go to and we missed it because we forgot to have something to stop the application from terminating. So let's debug that again. And as you can see, it printed customer and product. So that was a lengthy one. I was trying to explain as good as I could all that reflection and generic stuff. If you liked that video, please like and subscribe. Thank you for watching and have a nice one.